Dr. Cheek. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. First, I want to start by defining trauma. So what is trauma? The APA, or the American Psychological Association, defines trauma as an emotional response to a terrible event such as a rape or an accident or a natural disaster. SAMHSA, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, defines trauma as an event that we experience as harmful or life-threatening. This could be a physical or sexual assault. This could be violence. This could be an accident. This could be emotional, psychological, or mental abuse that you experience in any type of intimate relationship or in a work relationship. It just depends. All of these are ways that we can define a trauma. When we're experiencing a danger or threat that can lead to a trauma response, what tends to happen is our brain sends a signal to our body or our sympathetic nervous system that lets our body know that we need to start to prepare to survive. So we tend to go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. I know we spend a lot of time talking about fight or flight. However, there are three that we primarily focus on, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And there's a new one called fawn that I haven't actually put a lot of research into or actually looked up extensively as it relates to the trauma response or reaction to trauma. However, like I said, when we are in face of a threat or a danger, the brain sends a signal to the body that says we need to prepare for fight, flight, or freeze. So your body may experience things such as elevated heart rate or tingling in your fingers and your toes. You may feel like you want to evacuate your bowels or need to use the restroom. You may feel like this heat response sometimes that may feel like it's rising from the back of your neck and kind of taking over your head. And there may also be the one of the final steps in that process when we're dealing with trauma is that front part of our brain, which we call the prefrontal cortex, or that frontal lobe, that goes offline. And the reason that goes offline is because that's a part of our brain that actually allows us to think things through, to rationalize what's happening in the moment, to kind of organize information, and to inhibit some of the behaviors and the thoughts we have at times. However, that goes offline because when we're in survival mode, we don't really have a lot of time to think things through. We're just trying to figure out how do we need to react and respond to survive. So we're either going to fight, so we're going to become aggressive, we're going to do what we need to do to fight in that situation. We're going to figure out what we need to do to be able to move quicker. Our body's going to prepare us to try to move quicker. That's the flight, but our body is also going to prepare us to conserve some energy to actually be able to make it through that situation, and that's a freeze. All of these things can happen when you're dealing with a threat or trauma, and we may have different responses or different fight, flight, or freeze responses based on the trauma that's occurring. Now, what tends to happen is once the threat is gone, once the danger is no longer present, we get an opposing signal from our brain and lets the parasympathetic nervous system take over to say, how do we start to calm these bodily systems? How do we start to change the elevation of the heart rate? How do we stop that sweat response, that skin response to start sweating? How do we stop that feeling that we needed to go to the restroom and stop that tingling in our fingers and our toes? All of those things start to calm down, and you start to be able to get to a place where you try to make sense of what's happening, what has happened, what your emotions and your thoughts are as it relates to that experience. And there's a time frame after experiencing a trauma that we allot to process the trauma, because it would be unrealistic for us to believe that we can experience something that's harmful or possibly life-threatening and then go back to normal everyday living. So there's a time period where we have time to actually process the trauma, and there may be a time where we have those elevated emotions as it relates to the trauma. So you may feel more anxious, or you may feel a greater level of depression as it relates to having to experience this. And a simple example is getting in a car accident. And let's say it's a non-threatening, non-injurious car accident. Even in those situations, the trauma itself can have you feeling like, at least for a couple of months or several months, that you don't feel comfortable getting in a car, or you don't feel comfortable driving a car. You don't feel the same level of confidence in driving a car. That's a normal, natural response to a traumatic event. Now, not everyone who experiences a trauma, whether it's one large event or multiple complex events, has post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So now let me repeat this again for the people in the back. Not everyone who experiences a trauma has PTSD. And that's simply because PTSD is a specific cluster of symptoms that co-occur all at the same time after a significant amount of time has passed for you to have the natural, normal response to a trauma. Now, some have theorized that when you develop post-traumatic stress disorder, that secondary response from your brain that goes to your parasympathetic nervous system that sends a signal that you're no longer in threat doesn't happen. That's one theory, that you never receive the signal that lets you know that you're no longer in threat. So you always feel on edge. You are always amped and ready to go into fight, flight, or freeze pretty quickly. One is no better than the other. That doesn't mean someone who is processing the trauma and does not have post-traumatic stress disorder disorder has no other mental health concerns as it relates to the trauma. Some people may have residual anxiety as it relates to the trauma. Some people may have increased depression. Some people may have a combination of both. And some may have another mental health concern as it relates to that trauma. Not everyone meets criteria or has all of the cluster of the symptoms after a significant amount of time to be able to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.